Double Primer is back-to-back conversations with someone passionate about their work and passionate about someone else's work. Mostly art and mostly Atlanta. I'm your host, Sean Mills.
Welcome to Double Primer, episode 42. This is May 8th, 2019, but we're going to be talking about May the 4th. That was the day that we went to a May the 4th Makers art show at the art station, Big Shanty. So, Tanju, after having participated in it and being there, how would you describe the event?
Yeah, hi. Dude, it was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. It was May the 4th be with you, right? So playing off of the big Star Wars day. Although it wasn't entirely Star Wars themed, which I thought was cool. That was something that they were very conscious to not make it be just strictly a Star Wars, tribute or fandom, but it was very much, I think, geared towards all pop culture and kind of geek and maker themed artwork, right, that they were promoting. So I was actually pretty blown away by the diversity of the work that was there, kind of all coming from the local community was really impressive. Really cool to see that. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and you mentioned it wasn't just Star Wars specific, because May the Force sounds like May the Force. That's the pun there, but I mentioned to you on the day that it was also Free Comic Book Day. So
right.
On my way to the event and on my way out of the event, I went to do two different comic book shops. So I really had the geek experience. And all the different fandoms that I noticed, the big ones where there was dragon stuff, there was there was some Yodas, there was some
yeah, Yoda was cool.
Art modded thrift store art, which was kind of cool. There was a good little different melange of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And it wasn't I guess the dragon stuff kind of had that fantasy style art genre to it, right?
Right. And do you want to kind of go through the litany of actual Makerstation items? In particular, I'm going to ask you to tell me how you thought the spoil boards showed.
So the spoil boards, was that was my project, right? So I got a lot of really positive feedback. I guess more positive feedback than I expected, which was pretty cool. I guess it was a little bit more unique, right? Than I think it didn't fit into kind of any standard genre, right? It wasn't Star Wars or fantasy. So I think it stood out a little bit. And at least based on some of the feedback I got, people were really curious about it. And kind of a couple times I got questions of how it was actually made, right? And I thought it'd be a lot of fun to talk about the origin of it, is how it's a spoil board, which is a sacrificial piece from a CNC machine, and that every line was actually left over from a previous project. But that got a little too arcane, right? You could see some people's eyes would kind of glaze over, or they didn't understand what I was talking about, right? Because it is a little hard to imagine if you've never seen what this component is in a workshop. And then to have it painted over in kind of bright colors and then the black matte paint made it even more abstract, I think. So that was also kind of fun, kind of a fun experience, right? To kind of go through that dynamic. I really did enjoy kind of being able to interact with people, right? Both some of myself as an artist, and then also with other artists, as me being just an observer or somebody that was there to take it in, which is in the past how I had previously consumed art, right? It was in a museum for the most part, just me and maybe a friend or family, but definitely no chance of ever actually talking to the person that created the work. So that's pretty cool.
I consume it reminds me that the way I usually describe art to a skeptical audience is to relate it to food, and so I was thinking of it as sort of imagine just a cutting board, and then if you painted the cutting board after using it for 20 years, that's what the spoil board was. It was the residue of all the cutting.
Yeah.
But from me looking at it, I noticed that you kind of use primary colors, which for me evokes that kind of Lego kind of aesthetic. Did you have a particular vision in mind, or were you just kind of going on your impulses?
It was a little of both, right? So it was very, very loosely inspired by the Kandinsky circles, or one of the Kandinsky circles paintings, or maybe the most famous one, where he kind of had a lot of black matte background and then some colorful circles. But it's not like I studied him very closely, so it was kind of look at it a couple times, and then actually I got a little bit of sticker shock when I went to Lowe's to buy paint, like how expensive paint was, like a gallon of paint, because I had no idea how much paint I needed to. I had like no idea what I was doing, right? It was like one step at a time with this project. Even to the extent of like when you helped me cut the board that one day, that was all very much on the fly. Didn't really know how I was going to cut it until that decision was made. So I ended up settling for samples of paint from Lowe's where you could buy them for like $3. And I really, the idea was kind of loosely based by Kandinsky. What I really wanted was, I was hoping the colors would kind of glow and kind of radiate a little bit, right? And the effect didn't actually come out the way I had really hoped. I think it's like halfway there. So I kind of wanted this like glowing, almost like neon look kind of to what I was going for. So when I saw the paint and I started getting sticker shock, I ended up saying, okay, I'm going to do 3 paint samples to get the ball rolling. And I just tried to pick like the brightest color I could find. And that was the other funny thing that I didn't realize, because I went to Lowe's. I didn't go to the art store. I went to the hardware store. Was that you buy the white base paint and then they mix it for you, right? So when I was telling the guy I want some yellow and some red, he's just like, okay, what do you want? I'm like, I just some red. And then he turns and points to 2 different aisles that are full of the color sample swaths or whatever those little palettes are called. And he's just like, pick the one you want, right? Like kind of bored with me, kind of annoyed. And then I got a little bit of anxiety of like, oh my God, how am I going to choose a shade of red out of the 250 choices that are in front of me right now, right? And then repeat that again for blue and then again for yellow. So I tried to as quickly as possible to just zoom in on what I look like the brightest kind of primary, pure red, pure blue. Or although blue I was going more, I don't know if that's a pure blue, or I was kind of going for like a blue azure kind of Mediterranean blue kind of color there in that space. So.
Right, and that's quite a interesting little insight, and thank you for sharing it, because like that's a very scary moment, I guess, like to be just faced with your own ignorance, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, totally.
And then also there's the historical irony of thinking imagine 200, 300 years ago, that would be like somebody's dream, to be able to just pick from whatever color they could see on a wall, and you're just give me whatever, give me the usual, buddy.
Some flunky behind the counter who's not getting paid enough to be back there, just being like, yeah, I want this exact color right here, right? Or I think you can even take them 2 different samples. They'll try to blend it and make it work, right? They'll do any color that you can possibly throw at them. They'll give it a try.
Mm-hmm. Also, that's an interesting impulse you described of thinking I don't even know if you could monitor it yourself where it comes from, but the idea of, okay, I don't know about color, but I understand scarcity, so just give me the most potent. Maybe you're thinking it'll go the farthest, I'm getting the most bang for my buck. Is that?
No, I was thinking most potent because I wanted it to give a glowing effect, right? I wanted this thing to really contrast and pop against the black background. And I don't think I quite achieved that, actually. So one of the things that I was trying to replicate, which I also don't know how I did it the first time, but when we made the hang printer last year, and we painted the sign for the frame that goes along the top, right? It says hang board, and then the other one, not hang board, the one that says hang printer, the other one says the Makerstation in that turquoise font. That one I painted really carelessly, where I painted the grooves first with whatever paint Mike had bought. I have no idea what it was, some wall latex paint. painted the grooves really sloppy, and then went over it with a black foam roller, which is also latex paint. And so, from a distance, you kind of got that nice contrast of the black with the turquoise letters, and the letters are engraved into the panel. But when you look at it close and at certain angles, the black paint, because I was sloppy with the turquoise paint, you got 2 layers of paint there, so it reflects the light differently, right? I don't even know how to describe that. So it almost looks like there's like a little like electric frequency pattern underneath the black where the letters are. I don't know if you ever noticed that, or I don't think I pointed it out to you. But it's something you can see up close. You can't really see it when it's installed on the hang printer. And I was trying to replicate that because I was like, oh, you're going to be up close at the wall, right? And it'd be really cool if you could see some different, light, the effect of the light reflecting differently when you had black on top of color versus just one coat of black on the piece of wood. But it didn't work this time.
Yeah.
I have some suspicions as to the difference of like using gloss versus matte paint, but I'm not quite sure. It didn't come out as intended, right?
Real quick aside, like I noticed this thing where people who are painting with acrylic paints, which are like a latex paint, and the molecules love to like line up together and get really matte, right? As opposed to like oil paint, which has these, what I think of as real stuff in it. Like it's got like real minerals and real like
pigments.
Actual pigments that light reflects off differently.
Sure.
So if you talk to like people like painters, instructors that use acrylic paints, they'll often say like what you said, which was go for big, bold, and bright colors first because you need to capture that brightness, and it's only like life and lighting conditions and scuffing will only make it duller and duller, which is true of those latex paints. But then oil painters will tell you the exact opposite. Like because there's actual molecules of things having the light bounce off of, and you have the oil vehicle that it's also traveling through. You have that you have those layers of translucency and stuff. So oil painters will say, start gray. Like colors happen on their own. They're going to happen. They're going to get really gaudy really quick. So stay gray as long as you can. And just that dynamic is, you could spend a lifetime in those polarities.
Sure. Right.
But was it like, did you learn something for the next round? Were you kind of saying like that experiment's on the shelf, or what do you think?
I don't know. I definitely learned some. Definitely not that deep to what you were getting into there about the light interacting with the paint itself. I was aware of oil has a translucency to it. Oil paint does, which is why it's so, I think, preferred overall. But yeah, actually part of the challenge with this project though is it was something that I had known about for at least 6 months due to Jesse organizing this thing 6 months ago, in last year, essentially at the end of last fall, and me procrastinating until 2 weeks before the event to actually do anything with it. So there was this sort of element of rushing through it as well, which I think took away a little bit of kind of, impacted the process a little bit. Because I was trying to get through it rather quickly.
Another challenge you kind of faced was that you were wearing the two hats of being a performer, like you had your art, and then you're also like being an ambassador to the Makerstation, to the art station. So it was a unique situation where you guys were sort of like partnering on that, right? And, like we can bounce back and forth, but like I was just going to name check that we also had Brett, who's been on the podcast. He was there with you bright and early, right? Setting up all of like the maker artifacts. And eventually even had Mike come on through.
Yeah, exactly. And then they both had pieces that they participated in as well, right? Which was cool.
Shout that out! Like you guys had the mobile 3D printer, and you were printing like Avenger kind of keychain things and a little like a slug toy that like was fully
Articulated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I think those that like capture people's imagination is always just like, what is that? You know, like even if you've heard about 3D printing, we were talking about even at the show how for some people the only time they've ever heard it was like a news kind of headline saying like people are printing guns. You know, like this is sometimes someone's first actual experience seeing one in motion.
Yeah, Brett and I always chuckle that we're still amazed that for us, we're almost bored with 3D printing. It's gotten to that point, and that we encounter people that this is the first time they've ever seen it and they're blown away is kind of novel to us, right? Unexpected, which is always kind of cool.
Yeah, and another version of that, of like the mundane for you but mind blowing to others, was that as you were talking about getting kind of in crunch time, I bullied Mike into collaborating with me on the laser printed images of makers from pop culture. So we made like 32 different little vignettes that were kind of acting like little labs. So it was like scenes of different characters: Professor from Gilligan's Island, Doc from Back to the Future, and basically all the ones that I could remember.
Data from Goonies.
Data from Goonies
was my favorite.
And so, like, it was basically all the ones that I remembered, like, making impact on me as a kid, thinking, like, it's cool that like, this character's making stuff, and, like, that I aspired to it. And so he did, like, the hard part, which was laser cutting them, and it was fun to hear, like, the staff kind of talk about it, saying, like I don't even know what I'm looking at. Like, is this ink? Is this laser?
Oh, nice.
Like, what is this? Like, it had that kind of mystery.
I really liked your project. It came out. I really was impressed with it. And I had seen it I didn't see the work in progress, but I saw, I guess, a partially finished step when it was just one big piece and you guys cut it in half, which I thought was really cool. Or perhaps that was a different mounting that I saw. I'm not sure. Let's go see it. And it's funny to that point because there was another artist that did, pyrography, or I think this is what it was called, where there was wood burning, right? It was a sketch of Game of Thrones, a scene from Game of Thrones, but it was burned in wood. And I don't know if they used gunpowder or iron or both, but they definitely used fire and heat to make their piece. And Mike was commenting on it. He liked it. I was like, yeah, this is pyrography. I think they might even use some gunpowder on this. This is really cool. And it was very intricate, and he sort of smirked in like a really nerdy, geeky way of like, yeah, that's pretty cool. It looks like it took, countless hours for it to be done by hand. He's like, probably could have knocked it out about half hour on the laser cutter. Like with the smug tone, right? I was like, yeah.
So, like, to reveal the mystery, you did actually see a different incarnation. So, in between events of cutting it, the guys kind of got in gear and got ready for Freeside, which was like something that was like a garage sale where it was hosted for makers, and so
the week prior, right?
Yeah, so he had mounted them on like a temporary structure where he like glued them to a single panel, and then I was joking with him that like I was going to try to recruit him for like Team Magnet versus Team Box, like that you guys are like kind of like bonding over being in love with boxes, and that another thing makers tend to like gravitate towards is magnets, and we were kind of relating on how like we love magnets growing up, and like we're kind of intrigued at the possibilities. So like we hurried up and made like a purchase on Amazon and bought like these long sheets of magnets so we could magnetize like the backs of the individual wood panels and apply them to the canvas by a magnet on the backside. And anyone who was watching this whole thing would probably have gotten a really good laugh out of like how much effort we were putting in, because like exponentially more than if we just put them on like a piece of steel. But like the way the magnets were oriented, like you had to get it just right, or else like they would repel or they would not stick properly based off of like their directionality.
So wait, you had magnet on the back of the art piece, and then you had magnets on the canvas?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow.
So, like, if it was just a piece of metal, it probably would have been, like,
Just stuck
a
right
5-minute job.
like
But
a fridge. Right?
yeah, right. But, like, they can only attach in a certain way, the way we did it. Like, and we had to make sure not to turn, like, the magnet upside down, and we did it a couple times, had to pull it off, and
Yeah.
it was like,
you get screwed up.
it was very, it was very, like, fun in a weird way, and then also, like, that typical thing of doing it 10 times harder than it needs to be, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because those flat magnets or sheet magnets, those aren't actually one single magnet. It's like this weird lamination of like lots of magnet bars stacked side by side. I don't know if you've ever, I have to show you, you've probably never seen like the magnetic field of those things to see that there's actually like a distinct magnetic pattern on those things.
Yeah, I've never seen it visualized.
Were you aware of that?
Well, like, yeah, that he was acting as like a professor, and I was even joking that another one we could have added was Peabody and Sherman, because like I was feeling like the Sherman to his Peabody. I don't know if you know the reference.
Actually,
but
I don't know those references.
there was like this famous cartoon dog that had like he built a time machine to teach his boy like science, basically, like through history.
And the name of the cartoon is Sherman and Peabody, or is it
Peabody and Sherman, yeah. And I think it's probably going to be made into a motion picture if it hasn't already. But like I was just like that classic vibe of like there's the Doc and Marty. There's like that. So I was very much the apprentice in this whole scenario as he described the magnet.
Is that when you started calling Mike? We call him doctor, or we call him coach?
Coach, because he's a swim coach, and
yeah, the swim coach. I was like, he's coaching.
I crave approval of intelligent men, but I don't know, like that it even registers, like that I call him coach because he's like never mentioned it. Like that's good, that's bad. He's just like moves on to the next thing.
Like,
but
okay, whatever.
The makers were trying to think about like filling up a certain amount of space, or that was like, oh, we did our individual projects, but then at the last minute you're like, well, we should bring the arcade, we should bring all these like little items, and that was kind of a funny aspect to it.
Yeah, that's all Jesse's fault. Yeah, so it's funny because I was just thinking, I was like, it was like really, it was pretty stressful to like make some work to bring in as an artist, and then also try to be a host partner, and then have stuff to show, and like. And when you were saying that, I was like, yeah, Jessie didn't have any stuff on the walls. I think Jessie does some work herself, but she's the main, I guess she's like the director of the art station, right? She's like the boss over there, and she's the main host of the event. But she didn't have any stuff on the walls. Like she got off easy. It's kind of what I was thinking enviously. But
and then the flip side is that she had to physically hang everybody's stuff and make sure it worked.
But she's got staff to do that as well.
That's true.
Yeah, and even it's funny because Tony was a staff there, and he's like the maintenance guy, I guess, or the handyman at the station. And he built the dog and the robot structure there.
I never put that together.
And he was, sort of telling me about how they built the robot because Jessie wanted it and Jessie liked it, and he wasn't sure if Jessie was going to like it or not, but she loved it. And then they had what's that?
The RoboMutt of some sort?
Yeah, but what's the charity? Mostly Mutts?
Yeah.
I think you've been involved with them, right? So he built the RoboMutt for the Mostly Mutts event, like on a whim. And he didn't think it was that good. And he said he's going to do something else with it. And Jessie's like, no way. Like that is now, part of the entrance there. And he was laughing, and he like literally referred to, he's like, and I was like, yeah, that's a pretty cool story. He's like, yeah, and that's cool because she's the boss, right? And like she loved it. Like he sort of took some pride in the fact that his boss was the one, I think, recognizing that work and sort of promoting it to a higher level there at the entrance than what he had intended.
Right. And on that like kind of side story, like she was sharing that she was trying to in some way usher in like a cultural shift, like on some small level, like hoping that maybe it'll make ripples in the pond, that Kennesaw is like lots of areas around Atlanta kind of up and coming and growing and forming itself, and kind of in a way trying to form a renaissance, because she was saying specifically there was a lot of Confederate Railroad imagery, and that she's trying to like bring some other options to the table, like robots and that sort of thing, which I think is a really cool. I was going to say, is that your interpretation of like the Kennesaw area? Have you noticed that too, or is that just sort of an interesting idea to you?
No, I've definitely seen. I mean, I'm kind of blown away by like the amount of construction that's been happening, just development in general, in the last 3 to 4 years. It's quite a bit. I mean, Jesse was trying to get me to join the Kennesaw Arts and Commission Council. I forget what they're called. Cultural Arts Council. That's
Alliance,
in
maybe? Is there?
No, it wasn't the Alliance. It was it was like the one associated with the city.
Yeah.
Last year, and I was really flattered by the invite, and but didn't quite know what to do with it, because I think I was even less involved, like in the arts back then, like thinking about art as art, right? It was more of a maker thing. And honestly, I just didn't have the bandwidth for like joining another organization that is going to put a demand on my time, you know? So I kind of turned that down a little bit, but yeah, they've been developing that. KSU's got that Master Craftsman program that they've started in the last year, which I'm actually quite envious of. I've seen on the Marietta Square where they've been promoting like public art and those murals, right? They're going up around the Marietta Square, which I think is kind of novel. And I think that's all, as much as it's happening in Marietta and even Kennesaw, it's coming out of Atlanta, right? Atlanta's like the epicenter, and they're kind of riding those coattails. And I think, to Jesse's credit too, it's like there's creative people everywhere, right? Of all different genres, almost everywhere you go. And there's definitely an opportunity to showcase a lot of that, which I think is really cool.
For sure. And I had that experience too, because I worked with Mike on the woodcuts, but then I also did like a lot of painting stuff. So it was kind of interesting to have that sort of experience with people where they're like, "Oh, what did you make?" And me to say like, "Oh, I did the Lego thing." I was like, "Oh yeah, I saw that." And then also the raccoon thing. "Oh yeah, I saw that." And the woodcut thing. And then it's like they're so different. Like most people, like they kind of have more of a laser focus on like what kind of guy they are, that sort of thing. But on that note, like on the literal foundation of the building, they had a whole other kind of like wing going on. They had some robotics demonstrations of like a local robotics high school club, and then they had the library sharing their like Quidditch information, and that was kind of interesting too. That it's like I think we both commiserated on the fact that we were really impressed at like the quality of both the actual robots, and then even you pointed out the documentation they had for it.
Yeah, kind of the engineering, just the level of professionalism that robotics team from, I think they're Mount Perrin High School, middle school. I'm not quite sure what the Mount Perrin, it's a private religious school, but yeah, the quality of their work was quite impressive, to say the least. And it's part of First Robotics, so they build robots to compete, but being associated with the high school and middle school education, they try to make it well-rounded, so not everyone that's involved is technically building robots or programming the robots, but they make some of the kids focus on the outreach, right? The marketing aspect of it, the fundraising aspect, because actually robots are still, or have always been, crazy expensive, right? It's quite pricey to run a robotics team. It's actually a little bit of a criticism against the robotics organizations, is that they kind of price a lot of people out of it, right? You kind of have to be of a certain socioeconomic level to be able to participate in those things. And I mean, to First's credit, they're trying to address that for sure. But yeah, these kids were particularly impressive with the work that they did. So that was cool.
Yeah, and I want to echo your statement and kind of underline it that it feels cheesy, but I was like, you're supposed to be impressed by the robot, but very impressed at like how like together the organization was because, and maybe this is because we both like looked behind the curtain a little bit, but just I'm so used to these things being where they show you the robot and then they're like, and for pennies on the dollar, you can help us go to Memphis, but really it was like, no, we got tons of sponsors. We're just here to show you, which was like awesome. Like it's such a fun experience.
Cool. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to talk to the local Kennesaw library booth that was next to that room, or?
No, so I didn't. No, I didn't talk to them as a booth. So they came upstairs, and so because like Brent and I were the first ones there, separate from the staff. So we set up first, and then while we were setting up, the other groups were starting to show up. So they were kind of meeting us first because we were upstairs too. It was like pretty easy. So I can't remember the woman's name, but we definitely talked to her for quite a bit from the library. But I didn't actually hear that like what they were doing around Quidditch or like they got a Quidditch team or whatever. I'm kind of curious to learn a little more about that actually.
Yeah, that's going to be a good tease because that was one of the nice connections was that they said they'd like to come on the podcast and talk about it. So you'll be able to hear
nice.
the inside scoop. But just as a little teaser, so like they're like organizing like a rec league of Quidditch players, and this is something that I guess it's like kind of catching on like in the same way that like Ultimate Frisbee kind of caught on like 10, 20 years ago now. Like it's kind of like something that people kind of organized on their own, and now they're kind of taking it a little bit more like organized way. Like they had a pro Quidditch person kind of like come in and help. Yeah, and kind of like show them how it's done and how not to give each other concussions maybe.
So I'm not the geek I used to be. Like all I know about Quidditch was Harry Potter, that they're flying around on brooms and the golden snitch. It's like a flying thing, right? Like how are they playing? Is it just like lacrosse in like cosplay or something?
Well, I mean, like so, like that's a perfect like cliffhanger because like I don't want to like say it wrong before the expert corrects me, but basically, yeah. To my understanding is that it's like they say, what if we just do it as good as we can, basically running around on a broom. Yeah. So we lose the Z-axis and we lose like the like magic elements, but then we try to kind of like fulfill the other objectives. But
so geeky.
But like also just like as a parenthetical aside, like I remember that was my biggest issue with Harry Potter, and I hope that they can kind of address it. That like as a fan of soccer, like I just like my mind couldn't get wrapped around like the math of it, because like the premise was that it's sort of like hockey, there's like a goal and then there's like these people trying to get the thing in the hole, right? I get that part. But then the golden snitch, like you alluded to, if you catch that, the game is over and you get like 1,000,000 points. So, like, I always didn't understand it. It was like, why would you do anything else besides get the thing that gives you 1,000,000 points?
Right.
But, like, obviously, like, there's a little bit of artistic flair.
Right?
Yeah.
Make it interesting.
But
now what I'm really curious, I guess I'm going to ask this now, but we'll answer it later, is, like, are they using a drone that they're chasing around? Like, that would be cool, right? Where the snitch itself is flying around. The humans are running around on brooms pretending to be flying.
Yeah.
But if they had something that's actually airborne, they're trying to knock a drone down, like that could be cool. And dangerous.
Right.
Element of danger there.
Yeah, and I wonder what does
see.
that mean? They just get like the smallest kid to be the snitch and he runs around, or
Yep. I don't know.
We'll find out.
Yep.
Cool. Did you end up getting to sneak by to the comic book store after the event?
No, I was pretty exhausted by the end of the day, and then when I got home, my daughter was kind of not feeling well that day, so and she didn't believe me that it was Free Comic Book Day, so she's obviously not that into comic books. Where she just wasn't interested in going, and I was like, well, if you don't want to go, because I basically offered to take her if she was interested. If she didn't want to go, then I was like, nah, I'll just hang out at home. But I did kind of laugh, have like a dad chuckle where she just thought I was trying to I think she flat out said, "I don't believe you. That's crazy. That sounds like a lie or something." That there was comic book stores, like legit comic book stores,
right,
giving away free comic books.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I can share that I kind of had the dream experience because
Nice.
I dragged my sister there and to the second place, and she was able to like pick out some comic books, which is fun, and then B, like while we were walking around, which is like why they do it is to get you in there, right?
Of course.
I was able to find there was King Kong on the Planet of the Apes, and like as a graphic novel, and she's into apes, like that's an interest, so that like I found that and she was like, oh, that's awesome, and then she bought it, like a new fan was born,
Right.
which is like you can lead a horse to water, but like it's like, oh, this is neat, but this isn't my thing. Exactly. It's very easy for it to happen. And then for me, I was gaming the system because they have, like all the publishers, they send them to the stores, and it's kind of like up to the stores how they organize it. Mm-hmm. So like of the like 30 or 40 or 50 that are there, like they often say like you get 5 or you get 5 if you purchase one thing, like
Sure.
they kind of have different deals. So I was kind of like hitting up multiple ones to get all the ones I wanted.
Cool.
So it was. I had a fun time with it. Yeah,
you worked it, huh?
Uh-huh.
You worked it, sure.
It wasn't my first rodeo. And now that you planted the seed, maybe next year it'll be the time.
Yeah, maybe she'll be into it next year. Now, like I said, she wants to go to MomoCon this year, which is funny. I asked her too if she wanted to. She was planning to dress up for MomoCon, and it was like this very teenage sarcastic, like, no, I never do that. I'm only going because my friends want to go, and it's like, okay. I did try to pull one over on her. I was like, hey, okay, so I'll let you go to MomoCon. I'll give you a ride. I'm like, would it be cool if I dressed up as like cosplay repair and I could follow you guys around as like a cosplay repair, like dress up like an ambulance or something, right? Like a doctor. And like the look of horror on her face was just priceless. It was so awesome.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I think I'm exactly on the razor's edge between you two guys. So like, she can't imagine cosplaying it, and you can't imagine caring. Like, right. You're like, I have my pride in other things. Like, no matter what scowl someone gave me, like they could never like hurt my ego, right?
Yeah.
But like, so like being an art school student, like these options like would come up more organically than for other people. So like, I remember in school we went to like concerts in like dressed up as robots, and like this was even before like it was even like the whole cosplay movement has made it more normalized, and
yep.
And then but I would also have these moments where like I'd be dressed up as like a robot ninja downtown, and then like I'd run into an ex-girlfriend, and it would just like all the fun kind of like evaporated. Like it like changed states of matter. Like I went from ice directly into steam. There was no melting.
Yeah. Right. Sublimation.
Yeah. So like you have to be in the right mood, and you have to be with the right people, and
yep.
like you can't force it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think forcing it's the opposite, right? It's the worst thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Well, were there any other kind of like meetings you had, or like did you were kind of manning the table a little bit? Well, did you get any sort of interesting reactions?
One thing, I guess the one thing I wanted to share that I was thinking about is, again, I did enjoy talking to other artists, and it was really cool because there was one woman that showed up, and again, people were bringing their families, so you couldn't really tell who was who. And I don't normally like wearing name tags, but I did think the name tags helped to identify like who at least the participants were, whether they were artists or somehow involved with the show. So I was talking to this woman, and she was there with her family, and I was like, oh, you're an artist, which is one of your pieces. And I think it was her boyfriend points to one above the fireplace that was like a Xena warrior princess type of line drawing, pretty big scale, the woman. And I kind of had to do a double take, right? And they started sort of chuckling when I'm like, oh my God, that's like a self-portrait, right? Like she did a self-portrait of herself as a comic book character, right? Or a fantasy character. And that I really enjoyed. I thought that was cool. And then I'd seen that painting or that piece of work earlier, and I saw that didn't quite put two and two together till I'm talking and sort of looking around the room to try to pick out which was her work. And she did it. It was a really good self-portrait. It looked exactly like her, except that she's holding a giant sword and looking like a warrior in it. So that was cool.
Yeah, I had another kind of like macro or overall kind of impression that I was going to share, because like this might be a perspective you don't like hear that often, which is that like, so this pop culture themed art show is something that is kind of in the zeitgeist, but it's like it's sort of now just becoming possible, like in a weird way, because like historically, I was kind of mentioning probably in other conversations in the past how artwork, people were way more protective in the past of it, not wanting to look like kitsch and all that. And
that's right.
It used to be more of like a West Coast thing, literally how conservative people and grandpas would talk about like the hippies out in California kind of thing. So like there's like Pixel Drip Gallery, and there's like these things you see online of like pop-up art shows that are themed around Ghostbusters or something, and that happens way more on the West Coast than it does on the East Coast. And you would even be hard-pressed to consider Georgia East Coast, because like the New York area is obviously such a cultural difference than Atlanta, but
right.
I see this as like a good thing, because like growing up, there was like a magazine called Juxtapose that's just like kind of tattoo art, custom culture, like that West Coast scene. And if you're a kid and you're not living in California, like that used to be your oasis to be able to even, that like you don't get exposed to
window.
it.
Yeah, your little window to that world, right?
So like thanks to Jesse and you, like it's for some kids, I feel like it will be a nice little window that it's like, no, this is valued and it's fun and you can do this.
Totally. That's what I'm like. I'm always like grumpy old man, like, you kids, it's such a good time to be alive. Like what a time to be alive. You guys have no idea. Honestly, that was part of my motivation, and it still is my motivation for starting a makerspace in Cobb County, right close to home. I mean, it's in Marietta, but kind of that little origin story was like I felt like I sat around for years reading Make magazine in the early days, 2005 timeframe, and reading about like 3D printers that were being developed by these, amateurs essentially. And it was happening in like New York and LA and San Francisco, like just far away places. Right. And reading about it for years, and for a little while, like lamenting, like, man, I wish there was something like that close to, wherever I'm at. I did move around a little bit when I was younger back then, but nevertheless, it just seemed like it was happening far away. Right. Kind of exactly the scenario you described about the art magazine. And then one day sort of having this like realization that, and it literally, the magazine's called Make magazine, right? It was just like, God, if there's not one close to here, I guess we're going to have to, quote, make one happen here. And then that changed my perspective a little bit. And right around that time is when I found Freeside, which was kind of the original makerspace in Atlanta. And then kind of funny going through the suburban sprawl that Atlanta is, that even Freeside ended up feeling like it was too far away, right? When you had to deal with an hour commute with traffic, that just wasn't really viable to, at least at the time of my life, for me to consider being a member down there and being compelled to then try to open up and start a makerspace even closer to home. So.
For sure. And
definitely, I think at some point you realize things aren't happening that you want where you are, if you're able to do what you can to make it happen, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's a journey too, because like
it's easier said than done, but it's possible.
Totally. And the Makerstation is kind of like a oasis, and it might be like one step on someone else's journey. It might be one step on your journey. Like, because I remember like, afterwards you can kind of say like, oh, I was looking for a place like this, but For me, like I remember looking into like the 3600. That was like the Hacker Quarterly. I looked into like there's this thing called Drink and Draw, where it used to be like you meet up with strangers like in a bar and like a coffee shop, and you all just draw. And
Right.
none of these things was exactly like my fit, but I was just like kind of trying to seek out kindred souls wherever I could find them. And oftentimes it's like a matter of whether you kind of click with somebody or not. And
Exactly.
and so, like, you just got to keep on searching and keep on cultivating. And something that I really relate to when we talk is how, like, you're always kind of like testing the waters, thinking like, oh, I see this conference or I see this meeting, and I'm like thinking about going. Like that, you're always hoping that like you're gonna find another like
a little prospecting.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure, absolutely. Something. I guess this is my take us down a total hard tangent here, hard right turn tangent. But, I work in IT, working in a data science space. And I went to there's a Southern Data Science Conference in Atlanta, last month. So I went down to that, and they had, I can't remember if it was Netflix or Pandora, the companies were presenting. And they both have very similar use cases, or I'm talking in IT speak, but they both have very similar needs from their business standpoint of promoting and exposing people to new media, right? So Netflix is movies and TV shows. Pandora is music. They both have they're very much website driven internet companies, and their homepage has, expensive real estate, I guess, what's on that first page. So, they're the ones that are pushing the envelope in this what's called data science space of building all these models to try to decide what do they put on their homepage, right? How do they make that decision? They got hundreds of algorithms running, and the woman described it as like some of the algorithms have what is considered an exploitative goal to them, and other ones have an exploratory goal to them, right? So exploitative means we have a pretty high level of confidence that you're going to like or click on whatever we show you, right? Based on whatever rules that they've built into it, right? Either your previous history or your friends or whatever they're using for that data stream. And then the exploratory piece is they want to show you something new that they don't think you've ever been exposed to, but they're hoping you might click on it for various other reasons. So that's like more of an exploratory space, right? And they talked about like the tension that they have even internally within their organization of dealing with those two ends of the spectrum, which is exactly, I think that really resonated with me, where I feel like I'm constantly walking back and forth between those two, right? Is sort of putting together something I know that I want to do and I want to make happen, right? Like the Makerspace or the hangboard thing, versus like constantly like being on the lookout for like new events and new opportunities to go try something new as well, which I thought was pretty cool. You kind of get a more well-rounded experience, right? When you have both of those competing tensions going on.
Right, and they're kind of like also in flux. Like, I don't know if this is like a tangent, but like my sister was kind of lamenting the fact that she had kind of found an app system that she had used out of convenience, where it like had some very useful note-taking features, and that they, through whatever reason, it's changed to a different thing. So like she had like years of like notes, like she had like lists of things or like descriptions of how she got into certain types of software, like how she would change like her employees' passwords, and then they changed it so it's just like a screen capping system, completely eliminating the text aspect. And so she's now like trying to hack her own phone to like get the data out, because they just like orphaned their users. Like I guess they're like, we don't want to develop it anymore, or like
they don't want to spend the money. Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
they sold it, like, and it just also reminded me how I went through different things, and for at a certain critical juncture, I thought to myself, like, I don't want to be locked completely into the Google ecosystem, and so I kind of like put my foot down and decided I was going to use Evernote, and then Google bought Evernote, and it's like kind of this inevitable thing.
Google bought Evernote.
Or I don't know about like the actual buying, but I just know that it's like now you can log in through your Gmail, and that it's like the way YouTube was. Like it used to be like separate, and now it's like they're all kind of integrated, and you know, some of that's just a little bit of prejudice, and some of that's just a little bit of like taste, but like that's like a weird, you know, aspect to all this, that it's like, you know, remember Google saying like we're not evil, and now it's like they are evil, kind of.
You scared me because I am also an Evernote user.
Uh-huh.
I am a big Google user too, but I do want to have a little bit of separation there. And, I just Googled it real quick, or no, I didn't Google it. I used DuckDuckGo, an alternative to Google.
Oh, nice.
And it doesn't look like they've actually bought Evernote.
Okay,
it's just just an integration.
Right. I was kind of being a little bit hyperbolic, but
right.
But then also, like, that's the way it happens. It's just like one day, like they'll telling you we're not doing this, and then all of a sudden, like, Apple decides they're not going to support something anymore or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the money was good enough, right? And we decided to go ahead and sell out. Too good to pass up. Yep, definitely happens. So what else? I guess the one other thing I'll say about the art show, which I thought was cool, was the diversity of work, as I mentioned. So I'm skimming through a couple pictures on Instagram. There was an artist. I think this guy might be a Makerstation member, or he's thinking about joining, but he had some ceramic artwork. And I don't know if you saw it. It's actually on your sister's feed. She took a picture of it. It's a bowl. A ceramic bowl, looks nice.
Oh, like the alien?
With the alien at the bottom of it, which looked really cool. And then as I thought for a second, I'm like, dude, that's the last thing I want to see when I finish eating a bowl of cereal or whatever, right? Or soup, is freaking alien sitting down there. Oh, excuse me. But that was a kind of an interesting, that was a cool project. I like that work, actually, because it's like a juxtaposition there going on there of, you know, bowl, food, and then Alien, the Alien movie with the aliens that literally, right, they're like parasitic, right? I don't even remember the whole movie anymore. Did you hear about the high school in New Jersey that did the Alien production? That went viral?
Uh-huh.
And did you hear that, like, Ridley Scott found out about it and cut him a check for, I don't know, $5,000-$10,000 so they could do an encore with like a bigger budget?
Oh no, I hadn't heard that element. That's awesome.
That was even cool. I just heard about that like that week, right? So it kind of had reminded me of Alien, and then to see this little piece of art sitting there in this little community art gallery was pretty cool too.
Yeah, I mean,
very timely.
I don't think it's like reliable, but I have heard those like enough of those stories that I'm kind of intrigued. Like, so I've heard of something where someone wanted to interview, like, you know, Bill Gates or something, and they tried to call the office, they tried to call this, they tried to buy a seat at a charity dinner, yada yada yada, and then like they eventually devolved into, they wrote like a one-person play of like what they would say if they met him, and like that gets enough, like, you know, Google alerts that he'll actually read it, and it's like, it's kind of an interesting like low-tech, high-tech solution that
is awesome. Requires a lot of perseverance, right? But it definitely gives you hope not to give up.
Mm-hmm. And
try
then
some stuff like that.
It just, like, I don't know, like, if you follow it at all, but like how theater is another one of those kind of art forms that people kind of think of as being dead, but they don't realize how vibrant it is and how much it feeds into other things. Like, you know, like you people think like, I love movies, like I don't care about plays, but you know, you only get good movies because there's a system of schools feeding it, and like Robert Downey Jr. was in some version of a high school production in Europe that gave him the acting chops to get his, you know, first job, and
of course,
yada yada.
It's like the minor leagues, right, or whatever.
Right.
It feeds into the industry for sure. Yeah, I've only become recently aware of that through my daughter, honestly, in the last few years, and her interest in it, which has been pretty cool. And you know, went to my first musical with her, basically, and it's been cool. Actually went to one that was theater on the square at the Marietta Square that I definitely enjoyed more than I expected. It was Legally Blonde a couple years ago, which was pretty cool.
I don't know if I mentioned it before, but you were on Art on the Cob, or like the podcast, right?
Right. Yep.
Another a guest on that show is like the current theater director for Kennesaw State University, and he has like a lot of interesting things to say about the role of theater in the country right now. So you send it her way, and anyone else who's interested should check it out.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I do remember seeing that headline and then didn't click on that episode. Do you know, are they still producing the theater, or what was it called?
Art on the Cob?
Or did that fizzle out or go on a hiatus?
The library official at Kennesaw was kind of saying that I think one of the guys producing it kind of got a paying gig. So it was like that classic thing of like, dang, the drummer got a real job kind of thing.
Right. Well, anyways, that was cool while it lasted.
Yeah, for sure. That's how I found you.
Yeah, maybe get revived. Yeah, that's right, huh? You get revived. And I think that was also part of Jesse's vision of kind of developing the arts kind of in the Marietta, Kennesaw, I guess Cobb County area, right? Cool. Very cool. What about you? Did you have any other takeaways from the event?
Well, yeah, in a selfish way, I kind of was talking about it beforehand, and you've kind of seen different things in different levels, and I was just going to share that experience of how, your vision of what could be a good idea and what actually ends up resonating with people is really out of your hands. And so
sure.
And I would also take a little bit of the pressure off of you saying like, well, I kind of dropped the ball, like kind of got into crunch time and didn't work on it longer, which was that I was stressed about it. I was making my Lego paintings. I was doing this. I was doing that. My whole Crocodile Dundee thing kind of like went under the radar, like didn't really get any feedback from that. But then the laser cutter thing, which was at the 11th hour, ended up being kind of like a hit, I guess.
Yeah.
So, I think that was a little microcosm of art in general, which is that you create a situation, you try to make a plan, you try to use your past knowledge, but really there's a little bit of surrender to what's going to happen in the moment and what people are going to appreciate or happen to relate to.
Yeah. Yeah, that element of randomness or serendipity, for sure. Something that's been on my mind quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. I feel like I just find myself going like, God, I feel like I'm overthinking this, right? Like I'm just overthinking some of this stuff too much. And I think when you get into those crunch time situations, you're not able to overthink things, right? Or you're not going to get anything done. I do want to give a shout out. The other thing I enjoyed there more than I expected was the band that they had. It was like a husband and wife duo.
Right.
Zip Your Bird, which is like a really weird band name to me. I still can't quite get my head around that, but they had like really nice acoustic set where they were playing cover songs, but I enjoyed that. And they actually, it was pretty cool that we ended up helping them break down, getting to chat a little bit. And they sort of volunteered, like, hey, if you guys want us to come play at the Makerspace someday, like, let us know.
That's awesome.
I was like, yeah, that would be really cool. We usually do an annual birthday party barbecue thing. It'd be cool to have them come for that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they weren't too loud either. It was like a really nice, kind of a nice ambiance that they provided.
Yeah, to put it in my perspective, one of the covers they did that really hit home for me was that they did like a obviously acoustic version of the Spider-Man theme, and which like sometimes when you hear like a pared down singer-songwriter version of a song, it feels like lesser than, but like their choice of songs was perfect because like in the actual Spider-Man movie, the Sam Raimi original Spider-Man movie, like in the movie itself, they have like a street busker kind of person singing the song.
Oh,
so
wow.
it kind of felt like 1-to-1 for me, like,
that's cool.
Like it felt like, oh yeah, like I look over and it kind of had like the exact same, like this would have been like if I was like walking down the street in New York, like it was the same level of, performance. So like
Right.
I really enjoyed it, and like I felt bad that they didn't have a bigger audience because like people were kind of coming in at different times, and like
Yep.
there was a rain situation. So I always feel like they deserve more audience because a live performance, it's like you can't really stop if like there's no one in the room.
Yeah, they played right through it.
Yeah.
Sure, even at the very end when it was just like Mike and I just sitting there, I was like, I totally turned to him like, God, it feels like we're getting a private performance right here. Where they're just playing just for us,
Right.
which was really, yeah. It's funny. I didn't think about it in terms of like feeling bad that they didn't have more audience. I was actually thinking like, man, they should have put it like the guitar case out and collected tips because I think they would have gotten
Some, yeah.
Yeah, at least gotten some gas money, right, or beer money or whatever. But they didn't have anything out. But yeah, they were good. So I guess we need to start wrapping up. But I wanted to ask if you had any other like shows or events on your radar coming up as we move through spring into the summer.
So like,
Cheer.
yeah, and this isn't like final enough for it to be like interesting, maybe, but just as friends, like I can kind of share this, which is that like I had a fun experience of an Atlanta kind of community center, maybe kind of like similar to ArtStation in Atlanta. Found my work on Instagram and said like, hey, we'd love to have you show your work here. And it was kind of open ended, and maybe it's kind of like the way this was, where it's like it's not like we need you for this specific event. It's like we can talk about this sometime in the future, kind of thing. Like,
Okay.
it's like a conversation to be had, but so like it's always nice to be recognized, I guess. And
Absolutely.
but then at the same time, I was kind of like doing that move of they contacted me and I said, hey, that's awesome. Do you have like a date in mind? And I didn't get a response to that, and I was kind of like happy to let it sit for a second so I could kind of take care of all this stuff and the stuff I was working on, and then I could just in my mind say like, well, I contacted them last, so
Right.
I did my
Balls in their
part.
court, right.
But the truth is, I probably should start pursuing it a little bit more tangibly, and like that's the next move for me.
Okay. Cool.
How about you? Do you have like another?
So there's
major
another event. Yeah, there's another event. It is sometimes it feels like, gosh, there's no shortage of these things. And then another little piece of news to share. But one is the Soul Mill Library is going to have another mini-con event in July, I think. So they were Roxanne was, tapped me on the shoulder at the end of the day and was like, hey, can you guys come back to that? And then it was funny because I asked her if there's anything she wanted in particular, and then it was like, no, whatever you guys want to do is fine. But I think I want to, rather than doing the same old thing, bringing the 3D printer and the video game thing and just promoting the space, is collaborating with the steampunk panel from Dragon Con and doing like the teapot racing, or like a mini version of that. So that got my creative juices sort of turning to try to make that happen and make it a little more interesting rather than like the same old thing or doing the same thing we did last year.
Right.
We'll see if we can pull that off. And then today I just got a call. This is back to the point of the balls in different people's court, right? Where last year at Maker Faire, they had the local like graffiti artist collective, Lotus Eaters Club, do some pieces at the Maker Faire,
right,
on canvas. And I was very keen to ask on like what's happening in these pieces. Are they just going in a warehouse? Like, I propose the idea that the pieces should be rotated through maker spaces, right, for some time. And that was like, oh, that's a great idea. And, never heard about it ever again after I suggested it. Well, I got the call today from Liz, one of the organizers, asking me if I wanted to go ahead and get one of the pieces hung up at the Makerstation. And it's like a 9-foot by 9-foot, piece of canvas with their work on it, and have it displayed at the Makerstation for a while. So that was kind of a surprise that, getting that call today, and I'm going to try to figure out how to make that happen. And
cool.
I did like Liz's is really cool because we were trying to figure out a time when she could come, and she was volunteering to come drop it off at the space. And I was like, and wanted to help hang it up. I was like, oh, I don't want to commit you to that because we may not be able to hang it up that day when you deliver it. And she's like, no, that's the whole point, right? She doesn't want it to sit rolled up in a corner the way a lot of things end up.
Right.
Right. Without falling through and actually getting hung up. So that was actually really helpful to have her sort of her energy level. Yeah, be proactive about like, dude, I'm going to bring it and we're going to commit, to the hour or two, however long it takes, get this thing hung up so that it's actually visible and people can enjoy it. So,
and that thing of if you give a mouse a cookie, so like if she's in there, you can have a captive audience. Ask her if she'd like to be on the podcast sometime.
Oh yeah. Oh, she'd love to be on the podcast for sure. That's a good point. She runs the Makerspace down at Georgia State University, as part of the campus there, and one of the main organizers of Maker Faire. So
right, and
a big time cosplayer. She's
right
big in cosplay.
I kind of wanted to pick her brain about like the Maker Faire direction of like maybe doing a little bit more like conference aspect, because like I remember that was kind of like I don't know if it was her pet project or if that was just like a direction they were hoping to go, but I was kind of curious about that and in particular.
Yeah, just be careful because you may end up getting stuck organizing it yourself.
Oh.
If you dig too much into that.
Right, don't show too much interest.
That's the biggest challenge with that event, right, is finding the people to do the work, to set it up, to do the organizational work.
Right.
It's quite an undertaking. So.
Cool.
But, cool. Yeah, it's good catching up. We had a little bit of a hiatus, so it's good to get back into the flow of talking about art and maker projects in the Atlanta area.
Yeah, for sure. And so as we wrap up, I'll just kind of remind people that they'll be able to check the show notes to see the links to the robotics club that was there. I'll try to find a link to the Zip Your Bird music group. I'll see if we can, plug some of the Makerstation as well, since they were a participant, and also the Art Station if people are kind of curious about that. Anything else? Anything else we need to name check?
I would just say that the show at the Art Station, all the pieces of work that we described today, the laser cut, the Yoda, the Alien Bowl, are going to be up on display for the rest of the month of May. So I encourage people to go out there and check it out because it'd be an enjoyable experience, to say the least. It'll be worth your time.
Awesome.
Cool.
And I'll be sure to share your question about how do you do Quidditch on the land.
That'd be great. That would be great.
Awesome.
Looking forward to hearing that one.
Find more information at doubleprimer.com.